Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. Sunday, the 6th of August. Just getting ready for the round table discussion.
Liberal Senator Dean Smith's private members bill. Smith hopes to legalise same-sex marriage through a conscience vote in Parliament and intends to present the wording of the bill ahead of Monday's meeting. It's tomorrow afternoon. We'll probably know the results sometime tomorrow evening. But Conservative MPs are warning against such a move, continuing their push for a postal plebiscite. Here's what Liberal Senator Erica Betts had to say earlier in the week.
For the government to lose a procedural motion on the floor of the House is a grave matter, because what it says to the Parliament and to the Australian people is that the Prime Minister and the manager of government business can no longer control or determine the government's priorities for legislation on the floor of the House. And that is, in anybody's language, irrespective of your politics, very objectively, it's a grave matter.
That's Liberal Senator Erica Betts this week. Question here is, can the Prime Minister, can Malcolm Turnbull, stop the revolt over the same-sex marriage debate? That's our topic for this morning's Sunday Roundtable debate. Now, with me is legal academic and contributing writer for The Spectator Australia, David Flint. Great to see you, David.
Good morning, John.
Rodney Croom is a long-time marriage equality advocate. He's in Hobart. Hi there, Rodney. Good morning. And John Nethercote is a political historian, adjunct professor from the Australian Catholic University. He joins us this morning from our Parliamentary House studio. G'day, John.
Good morning, folks.
Gentlemen, let's start with John. There's an extraordinary meeting, as I mentioned. This is tomorrow. How unusual, John, is it for the Liberal Party to call a meeting like this?
Very unusual. We're in our uncharted territory, and precisely what the outcome will be, or even the course of events, very difficult to work out. Remembering that Erica Betts was talking about voting in the House of Representatives, but if the bill starts its parliamentary journey in the Senate, well, it still has to get to the House before there's any activity at that end.
It's a Liberal Party room meeting. Why not a joint party room meeting with the National MPs? This is what we had 2 years ago when the Coalition established its position on same-sex policy.
Yes, the Liberal Party, particularly on contentious matters, has always felt the right from time to time to have a meeting just of itself. The Nationals, in fact, much more frequent.
Guess what? Personally, I reckon that spending half an hour listening to Tom Schwitzer and his right-wing cronies worry about the Liberal Party and what they're going to do about gay marriage is going to be as boring as batshit. Certainly it will be to me. And I'm just not into wasting my time on YouTube being boring. So how about we adjourn this for half an hour and we see what Waleed Ali has got to say, and maybe there might be some more interesting stuff to listen to. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Adjourning.
Welcome to another edition of the Minefield. It's wonderful to have your company with us once more. This is notionally a show about negotiating ethical and moral dilemmas in modern life. I think probably more honest to say it's a show about describing the contours of modern life and then standing back in befuddlement, really, at what we've just unearthed and then going home. I think that's the way it generally works. Waleed Ali is my name. Scott Stevens is my co-host.
Well, you're chuckling co-host. I know you say that with a fair degree of mirth, Waleed, but you know, one of the interesting things, and as I love listening to your intros, because oftentimes you stumble across things that really get to the heart of the matter before you've even introduced the matter. You wouldn't know this because you're not on social media, and I'm on social media because, you know, I'll get fired if I'm not. But it is interesting. One of the criticisms that we often get on our little show is that by the end of it, we end up in various forms of furious agreement. But I think, you know, if I may, that's just a symptom, I think, of fairly inattentive listening, because there's actually something.
That's a brutal thing to say.
Well, I mean, I do like to think that what actually happens in the course of the show is that you get convinced of the self-evident correctness of what I'm arguing.
It's interesting though that people are like, how could there possibly be persuasion? That's not the way it's meant to work.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
I think that's right. But I think there is actually something else going on here, that if I can characterize your position, I think most often you are maybe not content, but you are most intent on describing the situation as it is. Your real focus is on description. I don't mean that as a criticism, by the way, because I think that one of your great analytical powers is in the precision, the analytical sharpness with which you scrutinize a particular situation. Whereas I think for me, one of the things that I'm always asking myself isn't simply the descriptive dimension of a particular issue, but also the normative. In other words, yes, this may be the way things are, but is this the way, in fact, that things should be? And I mean, that of course is a very, very old philosophical disputation. What is the task of philosophy? What is the task of ethics? Is it description, or is it laying down some kind of normative ground?
I think what you mean to say is that you tell people what to do and think, and I outline the situation as it is, and then give people their own agency to respond in the manner they deem appropriate.
Geez, that's all a bit highfalutin, isn't it? Well, maybe.
Highfalutin? No,
Yeah.
it's fairly direct.
Well, I'm not sure about the whole telling people what they ought to think. Let's just say that what I tried to do is maybe to give people a bit of a goad to the moral imagination, that we mustn't become complacent and allow our horizons to collapse in on themselves just because things seem hopeless. Does that sound a bit more, respectable?
Yeah, I can see how that's a nice story for you to tell yourself.
Well, it is. Well, look, speaking of description, things have been quite bizarre over the last few weeks in Australian politics, haven't they? In fact, if you were watching Australian politics for the first time, you'd swear that you had stepped into a time warp. You'd gone back to a time when foreign powers were objects of great suspicion, when national loyalties are necessarily exclusive, and dual citizenship is the political equivalent of bigamy. As things currently stand, yeah, I know, I thought that was kind of sharp, but anyway, bigamy, indeed. As things currently stand, 2 federal senators have fallen foul of the now infamous Section 44 of the Australian Constitution, which forbids dual citizens from being a member of the House of Representatives or the Senate. As it stands, Coalition Senator Matt Canavan and One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts are both under a constitutional cloud, and Canavan's case has been referred to the High Court. But I think one of the interesting dimensions of this, Waleed, is that there's really no way of knowing at this stage how many federal politicians are implicated in what has now become a constitutional crisis. And this is interesting because just a little while ago, it seemed as though all we were looking at was the failure of a minor political party to do due diligence in vetting its senators or its representatives for high office. But what in fact has happened is this has now evolved in the space of a couple weeks into being something more like a systemic crisis that has rocked the federal parliament to its core. It's no wonder, I think, that the Greens leader, Richard Di Natale, the leader of the party that has lost most in this particular crisis, he wants to see the standard that's cost him 2 of his most high-profile senators applied across the board in a government-wide audit, and he's willing to let the chips fall where they may.
You've got a Prime Minister with a wafer-thin majority who wants this thing to go away, and I think both sides of politics know there could be people on their own side who are going to be caught up in it, and the club gets together, they try and protect each other. What we need to have a thorough and independent audit of the status of every member of the parliament.
That was Richard Di Natale. Raises all sorts of questions, does it? I mean, do we then do this with every parliament from here on in? It really is a very, I think, interesting, but I think probably problematic notion to have this kind of audit. Here's the question, though, that I want to put to you, Waleed. I mean, to one extent, what we've seen over the last few weeks is a reinforcement of the reality that migration has shaped Australian identity irrevocably. It is the dominant reality of our common life. There's no way of winding that back, nor, I think, would that be desirable. At the same time, I think we have reinforced the notion that globalization has in fact outrun, outstripped, and relativized the traditional meanings of national sovereignty and citizenship. So here's the question that I want to put to you. I'm really interested to see where you take this. Do you think, given these realities, do you think that dual citizenship deserves to retain the rather promiscuous overtones that seem to have kind of rushed back to the surface lately? Is this simply the fact that the Australian Constitution is hopelessly outdated and that we're simply lumped with it? Or do you think there's something deeper going on here? There's been a kind of trivialization or even a devaluing of citizenship that's taken place over the last few decades that we're now paying the price for.
Oh, wow. Devaluing's an interesting way of putting it. I think there's certainly been a transformation. So citizenship now, I think, connotes something quite different to what it would have connoted when the Constitution was first drafted. In Section 44, I mean, when you learn about Section 44 in law school, it's very brief, it's very straightforward, and the basic idea is that it's preventing people in the Parliament from being in a position where they're serving two masters. That's the idea. And that assumes something, doesn't it, about the nature of citizenship, that one's citizenship within a state brings with it I guess, a master. It brings with it a relationship of fealty and loyalty, that you would act in the interests of that state, I suppose, at all times. I'm not entirely sure. And so if you are in the Parliament holding a dual citizenship, when you cast your vote, are you casting your vote for Australia and the people that elected you, or are you casting your vote for that foreign nation? Now, I think this has radically changed, and the evidence of that, surely, Scott, is that everybody who seems to have been caught up in this, in Australian politics at least, had no idea. So they didn't even know that they were citizens of these foreign states. Matt Canavan, I think, went so far as to say he's had no connection with Italy whatsoever. He's never even been in an embassy. There's all this sort of stuff that just suggests that the whole notion of citizenship, at least as experienced by these people concerned at this point, is radically different from the notion that says that there is something elemental, something to do with fealty that is involved in this. And that, I think, it speaks to a lot. It speaks to the radically transformed nature of Australian society, where if you tallied up everyone who is a dual citizen, you would end up with an enormous number. Everybody seems to have connections to everywhere else. That's just the way that the nation seems to work. But it's also that I think the cosmopolitanization of the whole world is such that people very easily straddle multiple nationalities, multiple identities. That includes non-state identities. It could be to do with movements like feminism, or it could be to do with religious identity, or there are all kinds of identities that are now on offer. And these things have happened irrespective of what the state has to do about it or what the state has to say about it, but they've happened by osmosis. This has been something that I would say we've acquiesced, except that we weren't even aware we were acquiescing at the time. It's been radically transformed by the nature of capital, global capital, and the way that capital moves around the world, the way that we, as people who work within companies that use this global capital, move around the world as well. It's been transformed by global information systems. It's been transformed by migration. Obviously, it's been transformed by global notions of identity that now mean that citizenship, even within one's own state, doesn't mean what it used to, much less citizenship to other nation states that you may not have even been aware that you've held. So there's a radical transformation that this scandal, I suppose, has expressed.
Yeah, look, you're right. I mean, descriptively speaking, well, you're partially right. But there's something else, even just the way that you described this, Willie, there's something else that's going on here. I mean, let's just remember, for instance, that under the Westphalian notion of the nation state, citizenship isn't a right that the citizen claims to the state. Citizenship is fundamentally a kind of writ of ownership that the state places over its sovereign subject. It's a way of naming that citizen as a form of property that can then be dragooned into service in the national or the economic interest. What you're then describing, though, is a kind of quick transfer from that notion of vertical fealty, if you like, straight through to a deontologized or even a transactional notion of citizenship, where it's simply kind of one of these superficial things that simply circulates in the same way that money and various other forms of rather superficial or relatively deep forms of membership do. I guess what's being missed from this story, I'm categorizing things quite badly there, but what's being missed from this story is, if you like, a horizontal notion of citizenship. And this is, I think, part of the great civic humanist tradition running from Aristotle through Rousseau, Hegel, right down to Hannah Arendt and someone like Charles Taylor, that citizenship isn't just fealty to state, nor is it simply transactional. It's not just a matter of kind of paper and ledgers. But citizenship is also the name of the vocation that we give, that we have to fellow members of a particular political community. What I fear, Willie, to be perfectly blunt, is that we've moved in the way that we're telling.
There's the upload limit. Back immediately.